The girl with the scarred face arrived in Skidoo, California, on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun blazed so hot. The wooden building seemed to shimmer in waves of heat, and she kept her head down low enough that the brim of her worn hat cast shadows across the angry red marks that twisted down the left side of her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. Clara Everly stepped off the dusty stagecoach with nothing but a canvas bag and the clothes on her back, both items threadbare from hard use and harder years. The mining town of Skidoo sprawled before her in 1908, a collection of ramshackle structures clinging to the edge of the Panamint Mountains, fueled by gold fever and desperation. She had heard they needed workers at the boarding house, women to cook and clean for the miners who flooded into town with dreams bigger than their pockets. Clara needed the work, needed the distance from Nevada, and the memories that haunted her there. The scars traced a path from her left temple down her jaw, across her throat, and continued beneath her simple cotton dress. They were 2 years old now, but still angry and raised, still drew stares from strangers, still made children hide behind their mother's skirts. Clara had learned to move through the world like a ghost, drawing as little attention as possible, speaking only when necessary, existing in the margins. She found the boarding house easily enough. Mrs. Patterson, a round woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, took one look at Clara's face and didn't flinch. That alone was enough to make Clara's throat tighten with something dangerously close to gratitude. "You can cook?" Mrs. Patterson asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, madam." "And clean, mend, whatever needs doing. Room and board plus $2 a week. You start tomorrow at dawn." Clara nodded, following Mrs. Patterson up narrow stairs to a small room under the eaves. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dusty Main Street. After Mrs. Patterson left, Clara sat on the bed and allowed herself one moment of stillness, one breath of something that might have been relief. The next morning came before the sun, and Clara found herself in the boarding house kitchen alongside 2 other women, Emma and Grace, who chattered like birds while they prepared breakfast for 20 hungry miners. Clara kept to her work, frying eggs and bacon, baking biscuits, pouring coffee. The dining room filled with rough men who ate with single-minded focus before heading to the mines that honeycombed the mountains above town. She kept her head down, her scarred side turned away from the doorway, but she could still feel eyes on her. Some curious, some pitying, some calculating in ways that made her skin crawl. She had learned to recognize the difference, to sense danger before it fully materialized. "New girl seems jumpy," she heard one miner mutter to another. "Would you look at that face? Wonder what happened." "Fire, I'd guess. Shame, probably was pretty once." Clara's hands tightened on the coffee pot, but she kept moving, kept working, said nothing. Words were weapons that could be turned against you. Silence was safer. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, cook, clean, mend, collapse into bed after dark. The work was hard but honest, and Mrs. Patterson proved to be fair. Emma and Grace eventually stopped trying to draw Clara into conversation, accepting her quiet presence. The miners learned not to expect smiles or small talk when she refilled their coffee. 3 weeks into her time in Skidoo, the cowboy walked into the boarding house dining room. Kade Garrett was not a miner. That much was clear from first glance. He wore the clothes of a cattleman, dusty from travel, with a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. His hat was pushed back on dark hair, and his face was weathered from years under the sun, lines crinkling at the corners of his green eyes. He moved with an easy confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and being comfortable with it. He took a seat at the far table, the one in the corner where Clara usually felt safest serving because it kept her scarred side away from most of the room. She approached with the coffee pot, keeping her eyes down. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." His voice was deep but not rough, and when she poured, she felt his eyes on her, but not in the way she had come to dread. Not calculating or pitying or disgusted. Just looking, steady and calm. "Thank you, miss." She nodded and retreated to the kitchen, but found herself hyper-aware of his presence throughout the meal. He ate slowly, unlike the miners who shoveled food like they were in a race. He spoke politely when she brought more coffee. He left coins on the table that included a generous tip. Kade Garrett came back the next morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the week, Clara learned from Mrs. Patterson that he was in town looking to purchase cattle from some of the ranches that struggled in the harsh desert climate. He planned to drive them north to better grazing land, selling to ranchers who needed to rebuild their herds. "Good man, that one," Mrs. Patterson said, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. "Known his family for years. Father had a ranch up north before he passed. Cade's been working cattle since he could walk." Clara filed this information away without comment, but found herself watching for him each morning, a habit she did not examine too closely. It was a Saturday when everything changed. The boarding house was busier than usual. Miners coming and going at odd hours, some drunk from the saloons, others just starting their shifts. Clara was clearing tables in the dining room late in the afternoon when she heard boots on the stairs, heavy and unsteady. Jack Morrison lurched into the room, a miner she had learned to avoid. He had mean eyes and meaner hands, the kind of man who saw women as things to be used. She had managed to stay out of his path for weeks, but now the room was empty except for the two of them. "Well now," he slurred, blocking her path to the kitchen. "Been wanting to talk to you, Scarface." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped back, but he followed, whiskey fumes rolling off him in waves. "Come on now, don't be unfriendly. Pretty girl like you, even with that mess on your face, must get lonely." "Please move," Clara said, hating how thin her voice sounded. "Please move," he mocked, reaching for her arm. "What are you going to do if I do not scream? Who is going to care about some ugly girl who probably deserved what she got?" His fingers closed on her wrist, and Clara felt the familiar surge of panic, the same terror that had filled her 2 years ago when flames had engulfed the house, when her stepfather had locked the door from the outside, when she had barely escaped through a window, burning as she ran. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, bruising. His other hand reached for her face, whether to hit or caress she did not know and did not want to find out. She opened her mouth to scream, and then suddenly Morrison was not touching her anymore. Kade Garrett had him by the collar, had lifted him nearly off his feet despite the miner's bulk, and his face was carved from stone, his green eyes cold as winter. "The lady asked you to move," Kade said, his voice quiet but carrying more threat than any shout could have. Morrison swung wildly, but Kade sidestepped easily, still holding the man's collar. In one smooth motion, he propelled Morrison toward the door with enough force that the drunk miner stumbled, caught himself, and had enough sense to read the danger in Cade's stance. "Just having a bit of fun," Morrison muttered, but he backed toward the stairs. "Find your fun somewhere else. And if I hear you have bothered this woman or any other again, we will have a longer conversation." Morrison disappeared up the stairs, muttering threats, but Clara knew he would not follow through. Men like Morrison were cowards at heart, brave only when they faced those weaker than themselves. She stood frozen, still holding the tray of dirty dishes, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. Kade turned to her, and his expression shifted from hard to gentle so quickly it made her throat ache. "Are you hurt?" he asked, stepping closer but not too close, giving her space. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her wrist throbbed where Morrison had grabbed her, would probably bruise, but that was nothing compared to what could have happened. "Let me see your arm." Clara hesitated, then set down the tray and extended her arm. Kade's hands were gentle as he examined her wrist, his calloused fingers surprisingly careful. His touch made her feel strange, vulnerable but not threatened, seen but not exposed. "It will bruise, but nothing is broken," he said. "You should put some cold water on it." "Thank you," Clara whispered, finally finding her voice. She started to pull away, to retreat to the safety of the kitchen, but his next words stopped her. "He was wrong, you know." She looked up at him, confused, and found him watching her with those steady green eyes. "About what he said, about your face, about you deserving anything." Cade paused, and when he continued, his voice was soft. "And about you being ugly. That is the furthest thing from truth." Heat flooded Clara's face, and she instinctively turned to hide her scars, but Cade's hand came up, not touching but hovering near her chin, a question. She could have stepped back. Should have stepped back. Instead, she froze, barely breathing, as he very gently guided her face back toward him. His eyes traced the scars that she hated, the twisted red lines that marked her as damaged, as broken. But there was no pity in his gaze, no disgust, no morbid curiosity. He looked at her the way he might look at a sunset or a mountain vista, with simple appreciation. "They make you beautiful, not broken, darling," he whispered. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. Some wall she had built brick by careful brick over 2 years of running and hiding and believing she was exactly what the world told her she was. Her eyes filled with tears she could not stop, and she did something she had not done in so long she had forgotten the feeling. She believed him. Not completely, not entirely, but enough that a tiny seed of hope planted itself somewhere deep inside where she had thought nothing could grow any more. She pulled away gently, and this time he let her go, but the warmth of his words stayed with her as she fled to the kitchen. That night, Clara lay in her small room under the eaves and touched her scars in the darkness, tracing the familiar raised lines, but for the first time wondering if maybe they did not define her. If maybe she could be more than the worst thing that had happened to her. Kade Garrett continued to come to the boarding house for meals, and Clara found herself hoping each morning that he would be there. They did not speak much at first. He would greet her politely, she would serve his food, he would thank her. Small exchanges, nothing remarkable, except for the way he looked at her, always meeting her eyes, never staring at her scars with anything but acceptance. Gradually, the exchanges grew longer. He asked how she was settling into Skidoo. She answered briefly but honestly. He mentioned the cattle he was purchasing, the ranch he hoped to build. She asked questions, surprised by her own curiosity. He spoke of the land up north, near Sacramento, where grass grew thick and rivers ran year-round, so different from this harsh desert landscape. "It sounds beautiful," Clara said one morning, pouring his coffee. "It is," Cade agreed. "Hard life, but honest. I have always wanted my own place, something I built myself." "That is a good dream. What about you? What do you dream of?" The question caught Clara off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She did not know how to answer, did not know if she still had dreams or if she had buried them along with everything else. "I do not know any more," she admitted quietly. Cade studied her for a moment, then nodded as if she had said something profound instead of sad. "Well, when you figure it out, I would like to hear about it." The simple assumption that she had a future, that she would have dreams again, made Clara feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the desert heat. Spring turned toward summer, and Skidoo baked under a relentless sun. The mines produced their gold, the saloons stayed busy, and life in the rough town continued its chaotic rhythm. Clara settled into her work, even beginning to exchange occasional words with Emma and Grace. Mrs. Patterson proved to be more than an employer, offering quiet friendship that Clara slowly learned to accept, but it was Kade who filled her thoughts more and more as weeks passed. She learned that he was 26, 3 years older than her own 23. She learned that he had lost his parents to influenza 5 years earlier, that he had a younger sister married and settled in Oregon, that he preferred his coffee black and his eggs over easy. Small details that she collected like treasures. She also learned that he was kind without being weak, confident without being arrogant, and that when he smiled at her, which he did more and more often, her heart did strange, fluttering things in her chest. What she did not expect was for him to invite her to walk with him one Sunday afternoon. "The town has a small church up on the hill," he said after the lunch rush had ended. "I heard there is a view of the valley from up there. Would you like to see it? If you have time, I mean, if you want to." The hesitation in his voice, so unlike his usual confidence, made Clara realize that he was nervous. The thought that she could make this strong, capable man nervous filled her with a giddy feeling she barely recognized as happiness. "I would like that," she said. They walked through Skidoo in the afternoon heat, past the saloons and the general store, past miners' tents and the stamp mill that processed ore with thundering machinery. Clara was aware of eyes on them, of whispers that followed in their wake, but Kade seemed oblivious, or perhaps just unbothered. He walked beside her, not too close but near enough that she felt sheltered somehow, protected. The small wooden church stood on a rise above the town, simple and whitewashed, with a cross on top that gleamed in the sun. Behind it, the land fell away to reveal a vast valley stretching toward distant mountains, brown and gold and beautiful in its starkness. "Oh," Clara breathed, stopping at the edge to take in the view. "Worth the walk?" Kade asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Yes." They stood in silence for a while, just looking at the landscape, and Clara felt something ease inside her. The weight she carried, the constant vigilance, the fear, all of it seemed lighter up here above the town with nothing but sky and sun and this man beside her. "Can I ask what happened?" Kade said quietly. "To give you the scars. You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. But I find myself wanting to know you, Clara, all of you, including the parts that hurt." Clara's first instinct was to deflect, to change the subject, to protect herself with silence. But she was tired of carrying the story alone, tired of the weight of secrets. "My mother died when I was 16, she began, her eyes on the distant mountains. "My stepfather, he was not a good man. He drank, and when he drank, he got mean. I learned to stay out of his way mostly, but I was young and stupid and I fought back when I should have just run." She could feel Kade listening, not just hearing but truly listening, and it gave her courage to continue. "When I was 21, I told him I was leaving, that I had saved enough money to go to my aunt in Sacramento. He got drunk that night, angrier than I had ever seen him. He locked me in the house and set it on fire." She heard Kade's sharp intake of breath, but he did not interrupt. "I managed to break a window, but by then the flames had already caught my dress, my hair. I ran to the creek behind the house and threw myself in, but not before." She gestured to her scars. "This happened. A neighbor found me, got me to a doctor. My stepfather died in the fire, and I spent 2 years drifting, working where I could, trying to outrun the memories." "I am sorry," Kade said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I am sorry that happened to you. That anyone hurt you like that." "I survived," Clara said, and realized it was true. She had survived. That had to count for something. "You did more than survive," Kade said. He turned to face her fully, and she made herself meet his eyes. "You could have let it destroy you, make you bitter and hard, but you are still kind, still gentle. That takes more strength than most people have. I do not feel strong. The strongest people never do." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his fingers gentle as they laced through hers. Clara's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it, but she did not pull away. "I know we have not known each other long," Kade said, "and I know I probably should be more patient, take more time. But I am not a patient man when I know what I want. And I want to know you better, Clara. I want to take you to dinner properly, not just serve you coffee while you are working. I want to show you my land up north, let you see the ranch I am going to build. I want to make you smile because you do not smile enough, and it is a crime against nature." Clara laughed, surprised by the sound coming from her own throat. "You want a lot of things." "I do," Kade agreed, and his thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But only if you want them too. Only if I am not scaring you or moving too fast. I will wait, Clara. For you, I will wait as long as it takes." She looked at him, this cowboy who had defended her from Morrison, who looked at her scars and saw beauty, who held her hand like she was something precious. Fear still lived in her chest, the old familiar fear of being hurt, of trusting wrong, of opening herself up to pain. But alongside the fear was something new, something that felt like hope, like possibility. "I would like to have dinner with you," she said softly. "Properly." The smile that broke across Kade's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Clara felt her eyes sting with tears. They walked back down to town hand in hand, and Clara did not care who saw, did not care about the whispers. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like maybe she could have something good, something real, something that was not defined by pain. Dinner was a simple affair at the slightly nicer restaurant that catered to the mine owners and businessmen rather than the rough miners. Kade arrived in clean clothes, his hair combed, his hat in his hands, and Clara wore her best dress, the dark blue one that Mrs. Patterson had helped her mend and press. He pulled out her chair, ordered for them both when she seemed overwhelmed by the choices, and kept the conversation flowing easily, asking about her life before Nevada, her mother who she still missed, the books she liked to read when she could find them. "I always wanted to see the ocean," Clara admitted over roast chicken and potatoes. "My mother used to tell me stories about it, how it goes on forever, how the salt wind smells. She grew up in a town on the coast." "Then we should go," Kade said simply. "Once I get the cattle operation established, once I have the ranch running smooth, we could take a trip to the coast. I have always wanted to see it too." The casual way he included her in his future plans, the easy assumption of "we," made Clara's chest feel tight. But it was not fear, not exactly. It was the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of something mattering, of having something to lose. "Tell me about this ranch you are planning," she said, wanting to know, wanting to picture it. Kade's eyes lit up as he described the land he had purchased, 500 acres near Sacramento with a creek running through it, good grass, shelter from wind. He talked about the house he would build, nothing fancy but solid, with a porch facing west to catch the sunset. He spoke of breeding cattle, of building something that would last, that he could be proud of. "Sounds lonely," Clara said. "All that land, just you." "It would be," Kade admitted. "That is why I hope I will not be alone." He reached across the table and took her hand, and Clara led him, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. The weeks that followed were the happiest Clara could remember. Kade finished his cattle buying and hired drovers to help move the herd north, but he delayed his departure, staying in Skidoo longer than necessary. They spent every free moment together, walking in the evening when the desert cooled, sitting in the boarding house parlor talking long after everyone else had gone to bed, stealing kisses in the shadows that grew bolder and sweeter. Clara learned what it felt like to be courted properly, to be treated like she mattered, like she was worth patience and care. Kade never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give, but his intentions were clear. He wanted her, not just for now but for keeps, and he made sure she knew it. "Come with me," he said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "To Sacramento, to the ranch. Come with me, Clara." Her heart seized, wanting and fearing in equal measure. "Kade, I cannot just leave. Mrs. Patterson needs me. I have work here. I am not talking about leaving tomorrow, but soon. A month, maybe two, to give you time to be sure to prepare. I want you with me, Clara, not as hired help or a friend. I want you as my wife." The word hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Wife. It meant trust, meant forever, meant putting her scarred and battered heart in someone else's hands and hoping they would not crush it. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Kade said gently. He shifted closer, putting his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "I know you are afraid. After what you have been through, you would be foolish not to be, but I need you to know something, Clara. I am not him. I will never hurt you, never trap you, never make you feel like you need to run. If you come with me, it will be because you choose it, because you want it, not because you have no other option." "What if I disappoint you?" Clara asked, voicing the fear that haunted her darkest moments. "What if you realize that I am too damaged, too broken, too much work?" Kade turned her face toward him, his hand gentle on her unscarred cheek. "You are not damaged. You are not broken. You are scarred, yes, but so am I. Maybe not where people can see, but we all carry marks from the things that have hurt us. And Clara, you could never disappoint me. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. Those scars do not take away from that. If anything, they add to it, because they show what you survived, what you overcame." He kissed her then, soft and slow, and Clara kissed him back, letting herself feel the depth of what she felt for him, the love that had grown despite her best efforts to protect herself. When they parted, she was crying, but for once they were not tears of pain. "Ask me again in a month," she said. "Give me a month to be sure, to settle things here, to be certain I am ready." "I will wait as long as you need," Kade promised. "But at the end of that month, I hope your answer is yes." The month that followed tested Clara in ways she had not expected. Mrs. Patterson, when Clara confessed the situation, was supportive but practical. "He is a good man," the older woman said as they kneaded bread together in the kitchen. "And good men are rare as gold in these parts. But you need to be sure, girl. Marriage is hard work even with the right person. With the wrong one, it is hell." "I know," Clara said softly, "but I think he might be the right one. I think he might be the only one." "Then you have your answer, do you not?" Emma and Grace were excited, gossiping and giggling like schoolgirls, helping Clara sew a new dress for the journey north, a practical traveling outfit in dark green that brought out her eyes. They had become friends despite Clara's initial resistance, and their joy for her happiness was genuine. But the real test came from inside herself. The nightmares that had plagued Clara for 2 years returned with a vengeance, dreams of fire and locked doors and hands that hurt instead of healed. She would wake gasping in the darkness, her scarred skin aching with phantom pain. Kade noticed the shadows under her eyes, the jumpiness that returned, the way she sometimes flinched when he moved too quickly. He did not press, but he was there, steady and patient, a constant presence that slowly helped Clara understand the difference between her past and her present. "You know I would never lock a door on you," he said one evening when she had pulled away from his embrace, some nightmare-fueled panic making her react before she could think. "I know," Clara said, feeling foolish. "I know you would not. It is just sometimes my body forgets, even when my mind knows the truth. Then we will wait until both your mind and body know you are safe. I am not going anywhere, Clara. I will prove it to you every day for the rest of your life if that is what it takes." The month drew to a close, and Clara found her answer not in one big moment but in 1,000 small ones. It was in the way Kade made her laugh when she was sad, the way he listened when she talked about her mother, the way he touched her scars with reverence instead of revulsion. It was in the steadiness of him, the way he showed up every day and chose her, again and again. On the last day of the month, Kade took her back up to the church on the hill, to the place where he had first asked to know her story. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose, and the heat of the day was fading into the cool of evening. "A month has passed," Kade said, holding both her hands in his. "And I am asking you again, Clara Everly, will you marry me? Will you come north with me and help me build a life, a ranch, a future? Will you trust me with your heart even though it has been broken before?" Clara looked at him, this cowboy who had seen her at her lowest and called her beautiful, who had waited patiently while she learned to trust again, who looked at her like she hung the moon. The fear was still there, probably would always be there in some form, but it was smaller now, manageable, overshadowed by something bigger and brighter. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like freedom. "Yes, I will marry you." Kade's whoop of joy echoed across the valley, and then he was lifting her, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. He set her down gently and kissed her thoroughly, and Clara kissed him back with all the love and hope and trust she had been too afraid to feel. "I will make you happy," Kade promised against her lips. "I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already do," Clara said, and meant it. They were married 3 weeks later in that same white church on the hill with Mrs. Patterson and Emma and Grace as witnesses, and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Skidoo. Clara wore the dress her friends had helped her make, and Kade wore his best suit, and when he lifted her veil to kiss her, he traced his fingers along her scars like they were precious. "My beautiful wife," he whispered, and Clara finally, fully believed it. They left Skidoo the next morning with the sunrise, Kade driving a wagon loaded with their few possessions and Clara sitting beside him, heading north toward Sacramento and the ranch and their future. The journey took 2 weeks, camping under stars, cooking over open fires, learning the rhythms of being married. Kade was patient with her lingering fears, gentle when she woke from nightmares, understanding when she needed space and time to adjust to being touched, being close, being loved. He never made her feel broken or damaged or less than. Instead, he made her feel cherished. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was more beautiful than Clara had imagined. Rolling hills thick with grass, the creek Kade had described running clear and cold, and a partially built house that was well on its way to becoming a home. Kade's hired hands had been working while he was gone, and the structure was solid, walls up and roof nearly complete. "It needs finishing touches," Kade said as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "Needs furniture and curtains and all the things that make a house feel lived in. I thought maybe you would want to help decide those things." "I would love that," Clara said, looking around at what would be their home. They spent the rest of the summer finishing the house and settling into married life. Clara learned to help with the cattle, surprising herself with how much she enjoyed the work despite never having done it before. Kade taught her to ride properly, to rope, to read the weather and the animals. She taught him to cook more than just beans and bacon, to mend his clothes so they would last longer, to find joy in small domestic moments. Their nearest neighbors were the Dalton family, ranchers who had been working their land for 20 years. Mary Dalton was a practical woman with 4 children and a generous heart, and she welcomed Clara with open arms, sharing wisdom about ranching life and becoming a fast friend. "Your man is smitten with you," Mary observed one afternoon as she and Clara worked in the garden they were planting behind the house. "I have seen many marriages in my time, but the way Kade looks at you, that is special." "I know," Clara said softly, still amazed by her good fortune. "Sometimes I have to remind myself it is real." "It is real, honey, and you deserve it. Everyone deserves to be loved like that." The first winter was hard, testing them both in new ways. The rains came heavy, turning the land to mud, and several cattle were lost to illness despite their best efforts. Money was tight, and the work was endless, and there were days when Clara wondered if they had been foolish to think they could make this work. But they endured, holding on to each other through the hard times, celebrating small victories, learning to be partners in every sense of the word. Kade never lost patience with her, never blamed her when things went wrong, never made her feel like a burden. Instead, he reminded her constantly that they were in this together, that marriage meant facing everything as a team. Spring came eventually, bringing new calves and new hope. The ranch began to show profit, not much but enough to keep them going, to make improvements, to plan for the future. Clara's nightmares became less frequent, and the constant vigilance that had defined her for so long began to ease. She started to feel safe, truly safe, maybe for the first time in her life. It was in the spring of their second year that Clara realized she was pregnant. The signs were subtle at first, but having helped Mary Dalton through her last pregnancy, Clara recognized them. When she was sure, she waited for the right moment to tell Kade. She found him in the barn one evening, tending to a mare who was close to foaling. The setting sun streamed through the open doors, turning everything golden, and Clara stood in the doorway for a moment just watching her husband work, marveling at how much her life had changed. "Kade," she said softly, and he looked up with that smile he always had for her, the one that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "Hey, darling, is supper ready?" "Almost, but I needed to tell you something first." He must have heard something in her voice because he straightened immediately, giving her his full attention. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Clara assured him, stepping closer. "Better than fine, actually. I am pregnant." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then Kade was moving, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides and pulling her into his arms. He held her carefully, like she was made of glass, and Clara could feel him trembling. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "We are having a baby." "Yes." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, and there were tears in his eyes, joy so pure and bright it took her breath away. "Clara, darling, that is the best news, the very best. When? Late fall, I think. November, maybe." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Clara felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This man, this life, this baby growing inside her, all of it felt like a gift she had done nothing to deserve but would treasure anyway. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Kade hovered like a worried hen until she finally shooed him away with a laugh. But as summer turned to fall and her belly grew round with their child, she bloomed with a health and happiness that seemed to glow from within. The ranch continued to thrive. They had hired 2 permanent hands, young men looking to learn the cattle business, and with the extra help, Kade was able to expand the herd. They added chickens and pigs, built a proper smokehouse, planted a larger garden. The ranch was becoming everything Kade had dreamed of, and more than Clara had ever hoped for. Mary Dalton proved invaluable as Clara's time drew near, teaching her what to expect, helping prepare clothes and blankets for the baby, promising to be there when labor started. "Are you scared?" Mary asked one afternoon as they sat on Clara's porch shelling peas. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do it?" "You survived fire," Mary said bluntly. "You can survive childbirth, and I will be right there with you, and so will Kade. You are not alone in this, Clara. You do not have to be strong all by yourself anymore." The words were a comfort Clara held on to when labor began on a cold November night. It was long and painful and frightening, but true to her word, Mary was there, coaching and encouraging. And Kade, despite Mary's initial protests that men should not be present for such things, refused to leave, holding Clara's hand through every contraction, whispering words of love and encouragement until finally, just before dawn, their son was born. Kade held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the tiny wrinkled infant to Clara and back again. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Kevin Garrett, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned their hearts completely. Clara had worried that she would not know how to be a mother, that her own damaged childhood would somehow make her inadequate. But the moment they placed Kevin in her arms, instinct took over. The first months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and endless feedings and the constant worry of new parents. But there was also joy, so much joy it almost hurt. Kevin's first smile, the way he curled his tiny fingers around Kade's thumb, the sweet weight of him sleeping on Clara's chest, all of it felt like proof that something good could come from even the darkest past. The ranch continued to grow as Kevin grew. By the time he was walking, they had tripled their herd and built a new barn. They hired more hands, and Kade's reputation as a fair boss and skilled cattleman spread. The ranch became known throughout the region, a place of quality livestock and honest dealing. When Kevin was 3, Clara found herself pregnant again, and this time the sickness was even worse than before. But she also knew what to expect, knew it would pass, knew the joy that waited at the end. Their daughter, Catherine, was born in the spring, a loud and lusty baby who seemed determined to make her presence known from the first breath. "We are outnumbered now," Kade joked as he held both children, Kevin on one knee and baby Catherine in the crook of his arm. "You do not seem too worried about it," Clara observed, smiling at the picture they made. "Why would I be? This is everything I ever wanted, this life. I am the luckiest man alive." Clara crossed the room to join her family, and Kade pulled her down onto his lap as well, all 4 of them tangled together in a pile of warmth and love and laughter. Her scars were still there, still visible when she looked in the mirror, but they no longer defined her. She was so much more now, wife and mother and rancher, loved and loving, whole. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and the 1,000 small moments that make up a life. Kevin grew into a serious boy who loved the cattle and followed Kade everywhere, already dreaming of the day the ranch would be his. Catherine was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding horses, and giving her parents gray hairs with her antics. When Clara was 32, their 3rd child arrived, another boy they named Kenneth. He was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit for hours watching the world, and he had his mother's eyes, the same unusual green that seemed to see straight through to the soul. The ranch was prosperous now, one of the most successful in the region. They had built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, with the wide porch facing west that Kade had always wanted. Clara had learned to love the land as much as her husband did, found peace in the wide open spaces, and the honest work of raising cattle and children. She stayed in touch with Mrs. Patterson through letters, hearing news of Skidoo and the people she had known there. Emma had married a mine owner and was apparently quite well off. Grace had moved to San Francisco and was running a boarding house of her own. Morrison had been killed in a mining accident, and Clara felt nothing but a distant relief that he could not hurt anyone else. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kade took Clara back to the spot where he had first told her she was beautiful, the place where he had seen her scars and said they did not make her broken. They left the children with Mary Dalton for the day and rode to a hill that overlooked their ranch, their home, everything they had built together. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Kade asked as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Every word," Clara said softly. "I remember every word you have ever said to me. I told you then that you were not broken. Do you believe it now?" Clara looked at her husband, this man who had loved her when she could not love herself, who had been patient while she healed, who had given her a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. She thought of their children, their ranch, the friends they had made, and the community they were part of. She thought of who she had been when she arrived in Skidoo, broken and scared and hiding from the world. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I believe it. I am not broken. I never was. I was just waiting for someone to see me clearly enough to remind me." Kade pulled her close, kissing her temple, her scarred cheek, her lips. "I love you, Clara Garrett. Every part of you, scars and all. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Clara whispered, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." They sat together as the sun set on their 10th year of marriage, and Clara felt a contentment so deep, it seemed to fill every empty place that had ever existed inside her. The scars were still there, would always be there, a permanent reminder of what she had survived. But Kade had been right all those years ago in Skidoo. They did not make her broken. They made her beautiful. They told the story of her strength, her survival, her refusal to let the worst thing that happened to her define her forever. They were part of her, but not all of her, and she had finally learned to see them the way Kade always had, as proof of her resilience rather than evidence of damage. Kevin came running up the hill at sunset, followed more slowly by Catherine and little Kenneth. The children threw themselves at their parents with the easy affection of those who had never known anything but love, and Clara gathered them close, breathing in the smell of sunshine and grass and home. "Mama, why are you crying?" Catherine asked, reaching up to touch Clara's cheek. "Happy tears," Clara said, smiling through them. "Just happy tears, my darling." "Uncle John and Aunt Mary said to come for supper," Kevin announced. "They have pie." "Well, we cannot miss pie," Kade said seriously, getting to his feet and pulling Clara up with him. "What kind?" "Apple." They walked back down the hill together, a family, whole and happy and healed. Clara held Kade's hand and felt the children's energy swirling around them like a warm wind. And she thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, stepping off a stagecoach in Skidoo with nothing but scars and fear and a desperate hope for something better. That girl could never have imagined this, could never have dreamed that happiness like this was possible. But it was. It was real and solid and here, built on a foundation of love and patience and a cowboy who had looked at her scars and seen beauty instead of brokenness. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of both joy and sorrow. They lost cattle to harsh winters and dry summers. Kade's sister in Oregon passed away, and they took the difficult journey to attend her funeral, introducing their children to cousins they barely knew. Clara's aunt, the one she had been trying to reach when her stepfather stopped her, found her through a mutual acquaintance, and they were able to reconnect and forge a relationship that brought Clara healing she had not known she still needed. Kevin grew into a fine young man, every inch his father's son, tall and strong and fair. Catherine shocked everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, and Kade and Clara supported her unconventional dream, sending her to school in San Francisco. Kenneth proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, able to see qualities in animals that others missed, and he became invaluable to the ranch operation. When Clara was 40, she and Kade took the trip they had talked about all those years ago in Skidoo. They traveled to the California coast and stood on the beach while waves crashed and seagulls cried overhead. Clara breathed in the salt air her mother had told her about and felt a circle complete somehow, felt her mother's presence in the wind and the water. Was it worth the wait? Kade asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Everything with you has been worth the wait," Clara said, leaning into him. They added to their family over the years, not with more children but with people who needed a home. They took in a young woman who reminded Clara painfully of herself, scarred from different circumstances but broken in similar ways, and helped her heal. They hired a ranch hand who was running from a violent past and gave him a place to start over. The ranch became known not just for quality cattle but for second chances, for being a place where people could rebuild. Kevin married at 22, bringing home a sensible girl named Ruth who took to ranch life like she had been born to it. They gave Clara and Kade their first grandchildren, twin boys who were holy terrors and utterly beloved. Catherine finished her veterinary training and returned home to open a practice, becoming one of the few female vets in the state and earning respect through sheer competence and determination. Kenneth married later, at 27, to a quiet woman named Elizabeth, who was as good at breeding decisions as he was, and together they took the ranch's cattle operation to new heights. The house grew louder with grandchildren, 4 and then 6 and then 8, filling the rooms with noise and laughter and chaos. Clara, who had thought she would never have family, found herself at the center of a sprawling clan, loved and needed and cherished. She still had nightmares sometimes, still woke in the dark with phantom pain in her scars. But Kade was always there, just as he had been for 30 years, pulling her close and reminding her where she was, who she was, that she was safe. "Bad dream," he would murmur, his voice rough with sleep. "Just shadows," Clara would say, and he would hold her until the shadows faded and she could sleep again. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the porch and into the yard. There was music and dancing, and more food than Clara had seen in one place in years. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left and the grandchildren had been put to bed, Clara found herself on the porch with Kade, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky just like they had done 40 years earlier in Skidoo. 40 years, Kade said softly. "Feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "You have any regrets?" Clara asked, a question she had never dared voice before. Kade turned to look at her, his face weathered now with age, his hair more gray than dark, but his green eyes still as sharp and seeing as ever. "Not a single one. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Building this life with you has been the greatest adventure. I would do it all again exactly the same. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, those are what made us who we are." Clara reached up to touch her scars, still visible, still there, part of her. "I used to hate these, thought they made me ugly, unlovable, broken. And now I know they are just part of my story, an important part but not the whole story. The whole story is this us, everything we built. The scars are just the beginning." "They are beautiful," Kade said, just as he had all those years ago in Skidoo. "You are beautiful. Every year with you has been a gift." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Clara kissed him back, tasting 40 years of love and partnership and choosing each other every single day. The porch door opened and closed as one of their daughters-in-law checked on them, then retreated with a smile, leaving them to their moment. "I want to go back," Clara said suddenly. "To Skidoo. I want to see it again, see where we started." Kade considered this. "It is mostly a ghost town now from what I hear. The mines played out years ago, but if you want to go, we will go." They made the trip that fall, just the two of them, taking a train most of the way and then hiring a wagon for the last portion. Skidoo was indeed mostly abandoned, the buildings weathered and worn, many collapsed. The boarding house where Clara had worked still stood, though it was clearly empty, windows broken and door hanging askew. They walked through the ghost town hand in hand, Clara pointing out where things had been, Kade listening as she told stories he had heard before but never tired of. They climbed the hill to the old church and found it still standing, white paint peeling but structure sound. From the church, they looked out over the valley, the same view they had shared 41 years earlier, and Clara felt time collapse, felt that scared young woman she had been standing shoulder to shoulder with the confident grandmother she had become. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for seeing past the scars to who I really was, for giving me time to heal, for building this life with me, for everything, Kade. Thank you for everything." "You do not have to thank me for loving you," Kade said. "That was never hard, never a burden. Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done." They stayed in Skidoo for 2 days, camping under stars like they were young again, talking late into the night about their life, their children, their grandchildren, all the things they were grateful for. On the morning they left, Clara took one last look at the town that had changed her life, the place where a cowboy had looked at her scars and called her beautiful, and she felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought her to that dusty desert town so many years ago. The trip home took longer than it should have, because they stopped at every little town, exploring and remembering their own journey north all those years ago. By the time they arrived back at the ranch, they had been gone nearly a month, and the family gathered to welcome them home with hugs and questions, and the comfortable chaos of being surrounded by people who loved them. Clara settled back into the rhythm of ranch life, helping where she could but mostly enjoying the role of grandmother, spoiling grandchildren, and passing on stories and wisdom. She taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, taught her grandsons to rope and ride, gave all of them something she had never gotten from her own family: unconditional love and acceptance. Kade slowed down as well, turning more of the ranch operations over to Kevin and Kenneth, but still consulting on major decisions, still checking the cattle every morning, still finding purpose in the work he had loved his entire life. On a spring morning when Clara was 65, she woke before dawn as she always did and found Kade already awake, watching her in the gray pre-dawn light. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "Why are you awake so early?" "Could not sleep. Was just lying here thinking about how lucky I am. Still, after 42 years, especially after 42 years, I get to wake up next to you every single day. I get to see your face first thing every morning. How could I be anything but lucky?" Clara shifted closer, tucking herself against his side in the familiar way they had slept for decades. "I love you, Kade Garrett. I love you too, Clara Garrett. Always have, always will." They lay together as dawn broke outside their window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From Skidoo to Sacramento, From broken to whole, from scared young woman to confident grandmother, every step of the path had led here. To this bed, this man, this life. The scars were still there, faded now with time but still visible, still part of her. But they no longer caused her pain or shame. They were simply marks on skin, proof that she had survived, that she had endured, that she had refused to let fire and hate and violence have the final word. Kade had taught her that all those years ago in Skidoo, when he had looked at her scars and seen beauty, when he had called her darling and meant it. He had shown her that she was more than the worst thing that had happened to her, that she could build a life worth living, that she deserved love and happiness and peace. And she had. Oh, how she had. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of Kevin and Kenneth, with Catherine providing veterinary care for the entire region and becoming something of a legend in her own right. The grandchildren grew, and some began having children of their own, making Clara and Kade great-grandparents and adding yet another generation to the family they had built. There were losses, inevitable with time. Mary Dalton passed away at 78, and Clara mourned her friend deeply, grateful for the years of friendship and wisdom. Some of the ranch hands who had been with them for decades retired or died. Each loss felt keenly by the family who had considered them part of their circle. But there was also new life, new joy, new reasons to celebrate. Every birth, every wedding, every accomplishment was marked and treasured. The ranch house walls were covered with photographs, a visual history of the family and the life they had created together. When Clara was 70, she and Kade sat on their porch during a rare moment of quiet, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The porch had been their refuge for 5 decades, the place where they had shared their hopes and fears, where they had made plans and dreamed dreams, where they had simply existed together in comfortable silence. "I have been thinking," Kade said, and Clara heard something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. "About what?" "About how to tell you what you mean to me, how to put into words what these 50 years have been, and I realize I cannot. There are not words big enough, important enough to capture it." "You do not have to find words," Clara said softly. "I know, I have always known. Still, I want to try." Kade turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "You took a broken, lonely cowboy with nothing but dreams and gave him everything. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me better than I was. You made me want to be better. And you did it all while fighting your own demons, healing your own wounds, building your own strength. Clara, you are the most remarkable person I have ever known, and I am honored beyond measure that you chose me." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, and she made no effort to stop them. "I chose you because you saw me, really saw me, not just my scars or my fear, but who I was underneath. You gave me the space to heal and the courage to try. Everything good in my life started the day you walked into that boarding house in Skidoo." They sat together as the sun set on their 50th year of marriage, holding hands, comfortable in the silence that only decades together could create. Behind them, the house filled with the sounds of family, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the continuation of everything they had started with a simple choice to trust, to love, to build. Clara's scars, those marks that had once seemed to define her entire existence, were barely visible now, faded with time and age into thin white lines. But their meaning had changed entirely. They were no longer symbols of pain and brokenness. They were proof of survival, evidence of strength, reminders that the worst day of her life had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of a journey that led her to Skidoo, to Kade, to this ranch and this family and this beautiful, impossible life. The scars were the doorway she had walked through to get here, and she would not trade them away even if she could. because they had made her who she was, and who she was had brought her everything she treasured. Kade had understood that from the first moment he saw her. He had looked at her scars and seen not damage but survival, not brokenness but strength. He had whispered words that changed everything, words she had carried with her every day since. They make you beautiful, not broken, darling. And he had spent 50 years proving those words true, loving her completely, building a life with her that was rich and full and more than either of them had dared dream. The cowboy and the scarred girl had found each other in a dusty mining town and created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love and family, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance, that healing is possible, that scars tell stories worth hearing. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Clara leaned her head on Kade's shoulder and felt complete. The journey had been long and often difficult, but every step had been worth it to arrive here, to this moment, to this man, to this peace. They made you beautiful, not broken, darling. The words echoed in Clara's heart as they had for 50 years, a truth she had learned to believe, a promise Kade had kept every single day. And as she sat on the porch with her husband, surrounded by the life they had built together, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, beautiful, beloved, and whole. Not despite her scars, but perhaps because of them, because they had brought her here, to this place, to this person, to this life. And she would not change a single moment, not even the painful ones, because they had all led here, to this perfect peace. The years had been kind, and the love had been real, and the scars that once seemed like endings had become beginnings instead. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not where you started, but where you arrived. Not what broke you, but what you built in the aftermath. Clara and Kade sat together under the stars, two people who had chosen each other across the decades, who had built an empire of love in the California wilderness, who had proven that the best stories start with the courage to try again, to trust again, to love again. And they lived happily, surrounded by family and legacy, knowing that their story would continue long after they were gone, carried forward in the hearts and memories of all the lives they had touched. The cowboy and his darling, beautiful and unbroken, together until the end and beyond.